Lest darkness fall continues as read by the bathroom reader. I am covering for the plurality report. Who really thinks I should read the actual paper novel instead of this awful PDF, which is fraught with spelling errors? Chapter 3. At the end of the week, Padway was gratified not only by the fact that he had not vanished into thin air, and by the appearance of the row of the bottles on the shelf, but by the state of his finances. Counting the 5 solidi for the first month's rent on the house, the 6 more that had gone into his apparatus, and Hannibal's wages and his own living expenses, he still had over 30 of his 50 borrowed solidi left. The first 2 items wouldn't recur for a couple of weeks anyway.
"How much are you going to charge for that stuff?"
asked Tomasis. Padway thought. It's a luxury article, obviously. If we can get some of the better class restaurants to stock it, I don't see why we shouldn't get 2 solidi per bottle, at least until somebody discovers our secret and begins competing with us. Tomasis rubbed his hands together.
"At that rate, you could practically pay back your loan with the proceeds of the first week's sales. But I'm in no hurry. It might be better to reinvest them in the business. We'll see how things turn out. I think I know the restaurant we should start with."
Padway experienced a twinge of dread at the idea of trying to sell the restaurateur the idea. He was not a born salesman, and he knew it. He asked, "How should I go about getting him to buy some of the stuff? I'm not very familiar with your Roman business methods."
"That's all right. He won't refuse, because he owes me money, and he's behind in his interest payments. I'll introduce you."
It came about as the banker had said. The restaurant owner, a puffy man named Gaius Attalus, glowered a bit at first. The entrepreneur fed him a little brandy by way of a sample, and he warmed up. Tomasis had to ask God whether he was listening only twice before Attalus agreed to Padway's price for 6 bottles. Padway, who had been suffering from one of his periodic fits of depression all morning, glowed visibly as they emerged from the restaurant, his pockets pleasantly heavy with gold.
"I think," said Tomasis, "you had better hire that Vandal chap if you're going to have money around the house, and I'd spend some of it on a good, strong box."
So when Hannibal Scipio told Padway,
"There's a tall, gloomy-looking bird outside who says you said to come see you,"
he had the Vandal sent in and hired him almost at once. When Padway asked Fritharic what he proposed to do his bodyguarding with, Fritharic looked embarrassed, chewed his mustache, and finally said,
"I had a fine sword, but I hucked it to keep alive. It was all that stood between me and a nameless grave. Perhaps I shall end in one yet," he sighed.
"Stop thinking about graves for a while," snapped Padway, "and tell me how much you need to get your sword back."
40 solidi.
"Whew! Is it made of solid gold or what?"
"No, but it's good Damascus steel, and has gems in the handle, and it was all that I saved from my beautiful estate in Africa. You have no idea what a fine place I had."
Now, said Padway, "for heaven's sake, don't start crying. Here's 5 solidi. Go buy yourself the best sword you can with that. I'm taking it out of your salary. If you want to save up to get this bejeweled cheese knife of yours back, that's your business." So Fritharic departed, and shortly thereafter reappeared with a second-hand sword clanking at his side.
"That's the best I could do for the money," he explained. "The dealer claimed it was Damascus work, but you can tell that the Damascus marks on the blade are fakes. This local steel is soft, but I suppose it will have to do. When I had my beautiful estate in Africa, the finest steel was none too good.
He sighed gustily. Padway examined the sword, which was a typical 6th century spatha with a broad single-edged 30-inch blade. It was, in fact, much like a Scotch broadsword without the fancy knuckle guard. He also noticed that Fritharic Stiphan's son, though as mournful as ever, stood straighter and walked with a more determined stride when wearing the sword. He must, Padway thought, feel practically naked without it. "Can you cook?" Padway asked Fritharic.
"You hired me as a bodyguard, not as a housemaid, my Lord Martinus. I have my dignity."
"Oh, nonsense, old man. I've been doing my own cooking, but it takes too much of my time. If I don't mind, you shouldn't. Now, can you cook?" Fritharic pulled his mustache.
"Well, yes."
"What, for instance?"
"I can do a steak. I can fry bacon."
"What else?"
"Nothing else. That's all I ever had occasion to do. Good red meat is the food for a warrior. I can't stomach these greens the Italians eat."
Padway sighed. He resigned himself to living on an unbalanced diet until, well, why not? He could at least inquire into the costs of domestic help. Tomasis found a serving wench for him who would cook, clean house, and make beds for an absurdly low wage. The wench was named Julia. She came from Apulia and talked dialect. She was about 20, dark, stocky, and gave promise of developing tremendous heft in later years. She wore a single shapeless garment and padded about the house on large bare feet. Now and then she cracked a joke too rapidly for Padway to follow and shook with peals of laughter. She worked hard, but Padway had to teach her his ideas from the ground up. The first time he fumigated his house, he almost frightened her out of her wits. The smell of sulfur dioxide sent her racing out the door, shrieking that Satanus had come. Padway decided to knock off on his 5th Sunday in Rome. For almost a month he had been working all day and most of the night, helping Hannibal to run the still, clean it, and unload casks of wine, and seeing restaurateurs who had received inquiries from their customers about this remarkable new drink. In an economy of scarcity, he reflected, you didn't have to turn handsprings finding customers once your commodity caught on. He was meditating, striking Tomasis for a loan to build another still. This time he'd build a set of rolls and roll his own copper sheeting out of round stock, instead of trying to patch together this irregular hand-hammered stuff. Just now, though, he was heartily sick of the business. He wanted fun, which to him meant the Ulpian library. As he looked in the mirror, he thought he hadn't changed much inside. He disliked barging in on strangers and bargaining as much as ever, but outside none of his former friends would have known him. He had grown a short reddish beard. This was partly because he had never in his other life shaved with a guardless razor, and it gave him the jitters to do so, and partly because he had always secretly coveted a beard to balance his oversized nose. He wore another new tunic, a Byzantine-style thing with ballooning sleeves. The trousers of his tweed suit gave an incongruous effect, but he didn't fancy the short pants of the country, with winter coming on. He also wore a cloak, which was nothing but a big square blanket with a hole in the middle to put his head through. He had hired an old woman to make him socks and underwear. Altogether, he was pretty well pleased with himself. He admitted he had been lucky in finding Tomasis. The Syrian had been an enormous help to him. He approached the library with much the same visceral tingle that a lover gets from the imminence of meeting with his beloved. Nor was he disappointed. He felt like shouting when a brief nosing about the shelves showed him Berosus's Chaldean history, the complete works of Livius Tacitus's History of the Conquest of Britain, and Cassiodorus's recently published Gothic History Complete. Here was stuff for which more than one 20th century historian or archaeologist would cheerfully commit murder. For a few minutes he simply dithered like the proverbial ass between two haystacks. Then he decided that Cassiodorus would have the most valuable information to impart, as it dealt with an environment in which he himself was living. So he lugged the big volumes out and set to work. It was hard work, too, even for a man who knew Latin. The books were written in a semi-cursive minuscule hand, with all the words run together. The incredibly wordy and affected style of the writer didn't bother him as it would have if he had been reading English. He was after facts.
"Excuse me, sir," said the librarian, "but is that tall barbarian with the yellow mustache your man?"
"I suppose so," said Padway. "What is it?"
"He's gone to sleep in the Oriental section, and he's snoring so loud that the readers are complaining."
"I'll tend to him," said Padway. He went over and awakened Fritharic. "Can't you read?" he asked.
"No,"
Fritharic said quite simply.
"Why should I? When I had my beautiful estate in Africa, there was no occasion."
Yes, I know all about your beautiful estate, old man, but you'll have to learn to read, or else do your snoring outside." Fritharic went out somewhat huffily, muttering in his own East German dialect. Padway's guess was that he was calling reading a sissy accomplishment. When Padway got back to his table, he found an elderly Italian dressed with simple elegance going through his Cassiodorus. The man looked up and said,
"I'm sorry. Were you reading these?"
"That's all right," said Padway. "I wasn't reading all of them. If you're not using the first volume—"
Certainly, my dear young man. I ought to warn you, though, to be careful to put it back in its proper place. Celia, cheated of her prey by Jason, has no fury like that of our esteemed librarian when people misplace his books. And what, may I ask, do you think of the work of our illustrious Praetorian prefect?"
"That depends," said Padway judiciously. "He has a lot of facts you can't get elsewhere, but I prefer my facts straight."
"How do you mean?"
"I mean with less flowery rhetoric."
"Oh, but my dear young man, here we moderns have at least produced a historian to rank with the great Livius, and you say you don't like—"
He glanced up, lowered his voice, and leaned forward.
"Just consider the delicate imagery, the glorious erudition, such style, such wit."
"That's just the trouble. You can't give me Polybius or even Julius Caesar."
"Julius Caesar? Why, everybody knows he couldn't write. They use his Gallic War as an elementary Latin text for foreigners. All very well for the skin-clad barbarian, who through the gloomy fastness of the northern forests pursues the sanguinary boar and horrid bear. But for cultivated men like ourselves, I ask you, my dear young man—" "Oh," he looked embarrassed. "You will understand that in my remarks on foreigners I meant nothing personal. I perceive that you are an outlander, despite your obvious breeding and erudition. Are you by any chance from the fabled land of Hind, with its pearl-decked maidens and its elephants?"
"No, farther away than that," said Padway. He knew he had flushed a literary Roman patrician of the sort who couldn't ask you to pass the butter without wrapping the request in 3 puns, 4 mythological allusions, and a dissertation on the manufacture of butter in ancient Crete. "A place called America. I doubt whether I should ever return, though."
"Ah, how right you are. Why should one live anywhere but in Rome if one can? But perhaps you can tell me of the wonders of far-off China with its gold-paved streets."
"I can tell you a little about it," said Padway cautiously. For one thing, the streets aren't gold-paved. In fact, they're mostly not paved at all.
How disappointing. But I dare say that a truthful traveler returning from heaven would pronounce its wonders grossly overrated. We must get together, my excellent young sir. I am Cornelius Anicius.
Evidently, Padway thought, he was expected to know who Cornelius Anicius was. He introduced himself. Ah, he thought, enter romance. A pretty slim, dark girl approached, addressed Anicius as father, and said that she had not been able to find the Sabellian edition of Perseus Flaccus.
Somebody is using it, no doubt, said Anicius. Martinus, this is my daughter, Dorothea, a veritable pearl from King Khusrau's headdress of a daughter, though I, as her father, may be prejudiced.
The girl smiled sweetly at Padway and excused herself. Anicius asked,
And now, my dear young man, what is your occupation?
Without thinking, Padway said he was in business.
Indeed. What sort of business?
Padway told him. The patrician froze up as he digested the information. He was still polite and smiling, but with a smile of a different sort.
Well, well, that's interesting. Very interesting. I dare say you'll make a good financial success of your business.
He spoke the sentence with a slight difficulty, like a YMCA secretary talking about the facts of life.
I suppose we aren't to blame for the callings wherein God stations us, but it's too bad you haven't tried the public service. That is the only way to rise above one's class, and an intelligent young man like you deserves to do so. And now, if you'll excuse me, I'll do some reading.
Padway had been hoping for an invitation to Anicius's house, but now that Anicius knew him to be a mere vulgar manufacturer, no invitation would be forthcoming. Padway looked at his watch. It was nearly lunchtime. He went out and awoke for Thoric. The vandal yawned.
Find all the books you wanted, Martinus. I was just dreaming of my beautiful estate.
To hell with, barked Padway, then shut his mouth.
What?
Said Fritheric.
Can't I even dream about the time I was rich and respected? That's not very...
Nothing. I didn't mean you.
I'm glad of that. My one consolation nowadays is my memories. But what are you so angry at, Martinus? You look as if you could bite nails in two.
When there was no answer, he went on.
It must have been something in those books. I'm glad I never learned to read. You get all worked up over things that happened long ago. I'd rather dream about my I'm sorry, boss. I won't mention it again.
Padway and Tomasus the Syrian sat, along with several hundred naked Romans, in the steam room of the baths of Diocletian. The banker looked around and leered.
I hear that in the old days they let the women into these baths too, right mixed in with the men. Of course, that was in pagan times. There's nothing like that now.
Christian morality, no doubt, said Padway dryly.
Yes,
chuckled Tomasus.
We moderns are such a moral people. You know what the Empress Theodora used to complain about?
Yes, said Padway, and told Tomasus what the Empress used to complain about.
Damn it!
cried Tomasus.
Every time I have a dirty story, either you've heard it, or you know a better one.
Padway didn't see fit to tell the banker that he had read that bit of dirt in a book that hadn't yet been written, namely the Anecdotes by Procopius of Caesarea. Tomasus went on.
I've got a letter from my cousin Antiochus in Naples. He's in the shipping business. He has news from Constantinople.
He paused impressively.
War.
Between us and the Empire?
Between the Goths and the Empire, anyway. They've been carrying on mysterious dickerings ever since Amalasuentha was killed. Theodahad has tried to duck responsibility for the murder, but I think our old poet king has come to the end of his rope,
Padaway said. Watch Dalmatia and Sicily. Before the end of the year, he stopped.
Doing a bit of soothsaying again?
No, just an opinion. The good eye sparkled at Padaway through the steam, very black and very intelligent.
Martinus, just who are you?
What do you mean?
Oh, there's something about you. I don't know how to put it. Not just your funny way of putting things. You produce the most astonishing bits of knowledge, like a magician pulling rabbits out of his cap. And when I try to pump you about your own country, or how you came hither, you change the subject.
Well, said Padaway, wondering just how big a lie to risk. Then he thought of the perfect answer, a truthful one that Tomasis would be sure to misconstrue. You see, I left my own country in a great hurry.
Oh, for reasons of health, eh? I don't blame you for being cagey in that case.
Tomasis winked. When they were walking up Long Street toward Padaway's house, Tomasis asked how the business was. Padaway told him. Pretty good. The new still will be ready next week, and I sold some copper strip to a merchant leaving for Spain. Right now, I'm waiting for the murder.
The murder?
Yes, for Thoric and Hannibal Scipio didn't get along. Hannibal's been cockier than ever since he's had a couple of men under him. He rides for Thoric.
Rides him?
American vernacular, literally translated, meaning that he subjects him to constant and subtle ridicule and insult. By the way, I'm going to pay off your loan when we get home.
Entirely?
That's right. The money's in the strongbox waiting for you.
Splendid, my dear Martinus. But won't you need another?
I'm not sure, said Padaway, who was sure that he would. I was thinking of expanding my distillery.
That's a great idea. Of course, now that you're established, we'll put our loans on a business basis.
Meaning, said Padaway.
Meaning that the rate of interest will have to be adjusted. The normal rate, you know, is much higher.
Ha ha, said Padaway. That's what I thought you had in mind. But now that you know the business is a sure one, you can afford to give me a lower rate.
Aye, Martinus, that's absurd. Is that any way to treat me after all I've done for you?
You don't have to lend it if you don't want to. There are other bankers who would be glad to learn American arithmetic.
Oh, listen to him. God, it's robbery, it's extortion. I'll never give in. Go to your other bankers, see if I care.
3 blocks of argument brought the interest rate down to 10%, which Tomasis said was cutting his own heart out and burning it on the altar of friendship. When Padaway had spoken of an impending murder, he had neither been passing off hindsight as foresight, nor trying to be literally prophetic. He was more astonished than Tomasis when they entered his big workshop to find Thoric and Hannibal glaring like a couple of dogs who dislike each other's smell. Hannibal's 2 assistants were looking on with their backs to the door. Thus nobody saw the newcomers. Hannibal snarled.
What do you mean, you big cottonhead? You lie around all day too lazy to turn over, and then you dare criticize me.
All I said, growled the vandal in his clumsy, deliberate Latin, was that the next time I caught you, I'd report it. Well, I did, and I'm going to.
I'll slit your lousy throat if you do, yelled Hannibal.
Frithoric cast a short but pungent aspersion on the Sicilian sex slave. Hannibal whipped out a dagger and lunged at Frithoric. He moved with rattlesnake speed, but he used the instinctive but tactically unsound overhand stab. Frithoric, who was unarmed, caught his wrist with a smack of flesh on flesh, then lost it as Hannibal dug his point into the vandal's forearm. When Hannibal swung his arm up for another stab, Padaway arrived and caught his arm. He hauled the little man away from his opponent and immediately had to hang on for dear life to keep from being stabbed himself. Hannibal was shrieking in Sicilian patois and foaming a little at the mouth. Padaway saw that he wanted to kill him. He jerked his face back as the dirty fingernails of Hannibal's left hand raked his nose, which was a target hard to miss. Then there was a thump, and Hannibal collapsed, dropping his dagger. Padaway let him slide to the floor, and saw that Nerva, the older of the two assistants, was holding a stool by one leg. It had all happened so quickly that Fritharic was just bending over to pick up a short piece of board for a weapon, and Tomasis and Carbo, the other workmen, were still standing just inside the door. Padway said to Nerva, "I think you're the man for my next foreman. What's this about, Fritharic?" Fritharic didn't answer. He stalked toward the unconscious Hannibal with plain and fancy murder in his face. "That's enough, Fritharic," said Padway sharply. "No more rough stuff, or you're fired too." He planted himself in front of the intended victim. What was he doing? The vandal came to himself. "He was stealing bits of copper from stock and selling them. I tried to get him to stop without telling you. You know how it is if your fellow employees think you're spying on them. Please, boss, let me have one whack at him. I may be a poor exile, but no little Greek catamite." Padway refused permission. Tomasis suggested swearing out a complaint and having Hannibal arrested. Padway said no, he didn't want to get mixed up with the law. He did allow Fritharic to send Hannibal, when the Sicilian came to, out the front door with a mighty kick in the fundament. Exit villain, sneering, thought Padway as he watched the ex-foreman slink off. Fritharic said, "I think that was a mistake, Martinus. I could have sunk his body in the Tiber without anybody's knowing. He'll make trouble for us." Padaway suspected that the last statement was correct, but he merely said, "We'd better bind your arm up. Your whole sleeve is blood-soaked. Julia, get a strip of linen and boil it." "Yes, boil it."